So Florida State's going to figure prominently, most people think, in the ACC race, of course, but also the national championship race this year. So for years, they owned the ACC. Clemson has broken through. It's been that Florida State-Clemson battle in the Atlantic to gain the championship game berth in the ACC and win it every year. And now Clemson, better than Florida State over the last few years, but the Noles think that they have the team to break back through. Deondre Francois, I got to tell you, Joe, has really impressed me. Beaten up because of the lack of strength along the offensive front last year. He brought the team back from 18 down against an Ole Miss team that was at full strength at the time in the week 1 opener, and a number of times throughout the season hung in against Clemson, led a comeback against Michigan after the Wolverines came all the way back and led that final drive. Just a number of times Deondre Francois showed us not that just that he's got the legs and the arm, but also the perseverance, and he's a real leader on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one characteristic that you say about Deondre Francois is battle-tested. I mean, he really learned on the job last year, week number 1 against a solid Ole Miss defensive front led by Marquise Haynes. He was battered throughout that ball game, showed poise, showed confidence, and really showed the ability to stretch defenses vertically with his arm. And as the season progressed, offensive line was a concern for Florida State, but he hung in there and really now is a battle-tested quarterback that should really pay dividends for the Seminoles in the 2017 season. I don't think there's one defensive front that he hasn't faced or that he hasn't seen in terms of a physicality perspective. He was sacked 6 times against Clemson. He was battle-tested again and battered in that loss against Louisville, another statistical top 15 defense from that type of standpoint. So I think it will pay dividends for Jimbo Fisher and the Seminoles entering 2017. But where is the continuity going to be on the wide receiver position? That's a main concern entering the week 1 matchup against Alabama.
Yeah, and Jimbo Fisher and company better hope that he doesn't get battered like he did last season, because if he's off the field, yeah, nobody wants to go to their backup quarterback. But Sean McGuire's transferred. Also, Malik Henry, J.J. Constantino appears to be in line for that backup job. And when we've seen him on occasion, he hasn't necessarily taken the reins of the offense and done much with it. They've got a few early enrollees as well with lefty Bailey Hockman. The offensive line, we mentioned that. It was a trouble spot last year, and really the weakness on the team. They started a number of different combinations in 2015 up front, trying to get the right chemistry up there, and it just didn't happen. And they will have to have that against what we expect to be another dominant defensive front in Clemson, let alone all the other teams they've got to face.
That's a great point. I mean, offensive line now over the last few years has been a concern since Florida State made it to the playoff and their loss against Oregon a few years ago with Jameis Winston when they had Cam Irvin. He had to switch to center. I mean, they've had multiple issues on the offensive line now for the last few seasons. And in order for Florida State, in my opinion, to take the next step, to make the playoff like they did in 2014, that offensive line is really going to have to gel, and they're going to have to show continuity at the early part of the year. And it's going to be very difficult without Dalvin Cook in that backfield. They have Jacques Patrick. They have a number of other key returning starters that had game experience. But I believe that in terms of that home run hitting ability, especially in the early part of the season, to miss Dalvin Cook will hurt that offensive line, and more importantly, will hurt the play-action passing attack of Deondre Francois.
Yeah, the offensive line typically for anyone gets undersold when you're talking previewing a season and looking at a team, but this is really key because you got to keep Francois healthy, and Dalvin Cook isn't. He's not there to break the number of tackles that he did. And yeah, they've got the 4- and 5-star recruits along the offensive line, but you got to build a cohesive unit that can work together. And that's no more important anywhere than it is along the offensive line. No group in football needs to work together like the offensive line.